Welcome to Conversations in Color, a weekly series committed to open, honest conversation and exploring hard questions regarding race and racism in Western Wisconsin and beyond. Here is your host, Ed Hudgens.
Well, hello there and welcome to Conversations in Color, emanating from the beautiful RCU Theater here at the Pablo Center in downtown Eau Claire. My name is Ed Hudgens. So glad that you're tuning in here. This show is all about helping us facilitate conversations where we can lean in on some hard stuff, talk about race, racism, racial justice, just a variety of things, and do it in a way where we're creating space to have honest conversation. There are three main kind of pillars that we stick to when it comes to how we have these conversations. Number one, we insist on honesty in our conversations. So we're going to lean in on the hard stuff, ask the hard questions, and not be afraid. We are committed to humility, meaning specifically that as human beings, we're all flawed and broken and limited, and so none of us has a perfect grasp on anything when it comes down to it. In fact, we don't really know ourselves all that well, if we're honest. So we insist that we kind of grasp onto that humility and recognize that we just don't know as much as we may even think we know sometimes. And then lastly, and I would say most importantly, is humanity. We, on this show, in this series, we are not going to degrade or dehumanize anybody. That's not what this is about. We are going to honor the dignity of each human being. For me, it's a personal thing. It's about seeing the image of God in people, and we are going to do that in this series. So I'm very excited today. We've got some panelists here that are going to join us for our discussion of stifled voices, voter suppression, and disenfranchisement. I have a hard time with that word, but I almost nailed it there. First off, I want to introduce you to David Carlson. He is the Rights for All regional organizer for the ACLU here in the area. Veteran who had 2 tours in Iraq. Yep. And studied here at the University of Wisconsin in Eau Claire. And David, welcome to the show. Can you tell us a little bit about Rights for All?
Yeah, thank you, Ed. So the ACLU of Wisconsin's Rights for All campaign is a campaign for pushing voter awareness, election protection. We host registration events, just bringing as much awareness to the community as possible, especially to portions of the community that are typically disenfranchised or have been historically disenfranchised.
Great, thank you. So next in line is our resident panelist, the esteemed, powerful, and lovely Dr. CiC Ducksworth-Lawden, my partner in crime. She is the president of Uniting Bridges. She is a professor at the university here in town in Eau Claire. And again, my partner in crime. Welcome once again, CiC.
Thank you. Part of my hat here today will be sitting on the executive board of Chippewa Valley ACLU.
There you go.
And on the State of Wisconsin's American Civil Liberties Union Executive Board.
Great.
So.
Yeah, we're looking forward to tapping into your expertise on this stuff. And then last, but certainly not least, well, not really even last, because we have somebody else, but Shanglore Waldinger is here with us once again. She is the host of the Society Exchange podcast, Social Exchange podcast, sorry.
Yep.
And is brilliant, and she does a lot of work for families here in the area, top secret covert operations. Welcome once again, Shang.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, of course. And now, last but not least, is our good friend Adam Akala, who works with CoLab here in Eau Claire, and he is just a central part to this Conversations in Color operation. We couldn't do this without him. Adam, what are you going to be up to tonight over there?
Hey, Ed, thanks for having me again. I will be watching the chat in the Paragon live stream this evening. If you're not joining us on the Paragon live stream, you can still interact with us by emailing us, conversations@tomeswab.com. That's conversations@TOMMESUAB.com. Or this week, you can actually call in with any questions that you might have. The number to call in is 715-600-0267. One more time, that's 715 1-800-600-0267. And you can call in with any questions that you might have. Otherwise, if you are joining us on that live stream, feel free to drop those right in the chat and we'll add them into our conversation tonight. So, first of all, we'd like to kind of set the tone for this conversation by asking a slightly informal question to our panelists. So, tonight's icebreaker is, if you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be? And Ed, I'll toss it over to you first.
Of course you will. The history of American professional wrestling. I'm joking. I actually already know all that stuff. I hate to do this because I have a feeling you might hear this from some other folks tonight. But the more I dive into these race issues and inequities and such, I find myself really gravitating toward the law and wanting to understand the law better. I thought I would try to come up with a different answer because I suspect my friends here will have a similar answer. But best I could do is American professional wrestling, so I better stick with it. David, how about you?
I was kind of racking my brain for this one as well, but it became pretty clear to me quickly after you took the law, fatherhood. I have a 2-year-old right now, and then another one on the way, and it seems right now that I don't know anything. Right? There's nothing I can Google that gives me all the answers. So I think that would be it.
You got a couple of us here that have been at it for a while, and we don't know much either. So.
Parenthood is, you never know.
Yeah.
When they hit 20 and you still don't know. So I used to say I really wanted to get an MFA in piano performance, and I still kind of want to do that, especially jazz piano performance, and go harass Frank Watkins over at the university and make him teach me. But I've run sound for a number of meadow shows and a number of other things, and I really
You said metal shows, right?
Yes, I did metal shows, and I still have my hearing. 5 metal bands, 6 hours, and I really would like to get a formal audio engineering degree, I think, and
That's cool.
do that.
All right.
My husband thinks, though, that I should get a law degree. So
Do it all.
I feel like I'm on a pageant here trying to answer this question, but I would say probably human psychology as it exists today. I think I'm here because I like to ask a lot of questions, pick people's brains. I consider myself a forever student, and understanding like the human condition, the way that people think, that's super interesting to me. It's maybe more specifically positive psychology, what motivates, inspires people.
Very cool.
And yeah, I would say that if I could be an expert in something.
I haven't known you that long, but that totally makes sense based on what I know of you.
Because I ask so many questions all the time.
Adam, you never get to answer this question, so I'm gonna throw it to you real quick. What would your answer be?
I mean, I would have to say history. I absolutely love history, and it's something that has been super interesting to me. In college, I kind of focused in musicology, music history, and specifically kind of how that tied into race relations in one of my seminar classes, which was super interesting. So I would definitely say history, just because it gives us a better understanding of everything that's currently going on by having a framework to kind of look back upon.
Makes sense. Totally makes sense. All right. So we're going to be talking about voter suppression and disenfranchisement today. Again, other people on this stage will pronounce that word better than me. But this is an important thing. And it's something that I don't personally have a lot of expertise in, but there are things that I understand about it that help me to see why it's important. We're going to have David and Salika help us out with some definitions and backgrounds in just a little bit. But when you think about the form of government that we have in the United States, a representative republic, where we elect officials to be the voice of the people, that whole process of electing our officials is very much dependent upon the voice of the people. That's the idea. That's what the vote is about. And so as I was thinking about this dynamic that we're talking about tonight, I'm thinking, so what we're really talking about is our voices that are being stifled in that process. And starting to think as well, how does that then impact the end result with a government that's supposed to be of the people, by the people, for the people, those kinds of things. So we're talking about these stifled voices, and we may talk about things like gerrymandering, voter ID laws, voter purges, the felony disenfranchisement. I'm looking forward to David teaching me how to say that word. But we're going to start off simple, because if you're like me, you may not be familiar with how these dynamics work. So I'm going to throw this question to you, David. What is voter suppression?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. Voter suppression, it can be either the legal or illegal. So it can be either legal or illegal efforts to restrict the vote in certain demographics. Historically, this suppression has occurred with people in communities of color, low income, immigrants, in areas like that. It occurs oftentimes through legislation. It's occurred through violence and a variety of other tactics that have been used. So, yeah. That's
okay. So it's basically the idea of you're just trying to keep people from voting.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So
but specifically targeting certain demographics.
Groups.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's intentional. Yeah.
Okay. So what about voter disenfranchisement? And tell me how to say that word.
So disenfranchisement,
I'm close.
I feel like you have it, yeah.
Disenfranchisement.
It's just big, you know? I got a Bible college education, you know? So.
Wait till we try to get you to pronounce miscegenation.
Oh, no, never mind. Let's get back to that. Help us out, David. What is this?
So this is a status where, so typically, like for me for instance, I would typically, because I am an American citizen, I would typically have the constitutional right to vote. Because I am also a felon on supervision, I am no longer able to exercise that right. So any legal means used to identify a person, a group, and make them incapable of legally registering and casting their ballot to vote.
Okay. So the differentiation there is really suppression is the active effort to keep groups of people from being able to easily vote.
Yep.
Where disenfranchisement is basically finding ways to disqualify people from voting.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so neither one of those sound great.
No,
and that's why we're talking about it tonight. Salika, would you give us a little historical background?
Well, you have to understand that across the history of this country, what we've seen is a widening of who could vote and a widening of who is seen as a citizen. So in the original Constitution, you had to have a land franchise. You had to be male. You had to have more than 100 acres. So if you lived in an urban area and you only had a business, you could not vote in federal and some state elections. Andrew Jackson, 1932, we see the passage of the amendment that gives universal manhood suffrage.
1832?
1832.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then after the Civil War, we see both a narrowing and an expansion. The 13th Amendment banned slavery except for felony, for being charged and convicted of a felony. So the way it reads is, no person shall be put at forcible labor except those convicted of a felony. So we refer to this as the new Jim Crow, because what the southern states did is they deliberately created black codes, and when those were banned under the Reconstruction Act of 1967, the Jim Crow laws that made things like vagrancy, standing and waiting for a bus, a felony, that made not having a labor contract a felony, that and many of these things were conflicting. So basically, you couldn't do anything. You could be picked up for any reason within these Jim Crow codes.
So what you're saying is they could rig the system.
They deliberately rigged the system. We have the notes. My students went through the minutes of those, the minutes of those legislatures as they developed the black codes. In Louisiana, it's called Le Code Noir, so it specifically says black code. In Alabama, it is called the Black Code, and it says
not
these
much for
things-
subtlety.
They're not subtle, and it specifically would respond to blacks. And in Louisiana, for instance, it is so specific that if one of your grandparents is, I mean, great-great-grandparents, it's 132nd black. Over in Florida, I think it was 164th. I want you to think about that. So they are defining race. And in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, they also include Malay, they include Native American, they include Asian, whereas some others they don't. And you see some of these same kind of laws in Texas against Mexicans, et cetera. So you see that passed 1867, 1868, you see the 15th Amendment. The states shall make no law that shall abridge the right to vote. But once the troops are taken out of the South in 1868, you see the beginning of what's called the Louisiana Plan. And that's a disenfranchisement plan. It is meant to strip citizenship rights from African Americans. And what it does, it uses voter suppression to do it, but it's also going to use 3 Supreme Court cases that I won't even get into. The first part of it is the literacy test. And when they first tried a literacy test in the 1870s, they found out that they were also getting rid of poor whites. Because 1870, maybe only 40% of the people in the United States could read. So what they do is then they try to poll tax. And the poll tax, which was meant to be onerous as well, was meant to keep poor people from voting. But again,
So you had to pay something to vote.
you had to pay every time. And not only did you have to pay every time, let's say you turned 21, and it was 21-year enfranchisement age until 1965. You don't vote at 21, but you decide to vote at 23. You have to pay the tax that was for 21, and you have to pay the tax for 23. It's a cumulative tax in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and North Carolina. So, but poor people couldn't then pay it. So what they add on top of it is a grandfather clause. If your grandfather could vote before 1860, before the Civil War, then you were exempt from all of these laws. So these laws will stay in place till, well, 1962, we see the 24th Amendment to the United States, which will ban the poll tax. But it's not going to be enforced until 1965. The enabling legislation for the 24th Amendment and the 15th Amendment is passed in 1965, and it is called the 1965 Voting Rights Act. But it will take another 15 years for people to feel safe to vote. People like George Wallace, people like Leander Perez in Louisiana, et cetera, they will give people axe handles to beat people who tried to integrate and beat people who tried to vote. Clerks will literally refuse to enroll people. So it takes a long time and a lot of effort to train, to catch the ones that are doing this. We're seeing some of the same thing today. ACLU has had a problem in certain places where clerks are refusing legitimate forms of ID, like military ID. And military ID is allowed, but you get a clerk there who doesn't want to let this person vote, and they say no, well, you have to get a provisional ballot. Provisional ballots may or may not be counted. So you get one clerk who doesn't know what the rules are, and now you have disenfranchisement, even though those at the top have not done that.
Right.
So that brings
It's
us.
unintentional even.
It's. I don't know if
Like
it,
on the front line, it could be unintentional.
if it can be
But the-
unintentional, but some of it is intentional.
Sure.
Some of it is just abuse of power because in this country we have always had a problem with bullies. And you get these little petty bullies who are in these kind of positions, and they get really power mad, and they get really happy about picking on people they see are more vulnerable than them. So that's why we have to be very careful about who we put into these governmental positions, because there's ways to disenfranchise and there's ways to suppress that, they're not written into law, they're not legal, but as long as they're enforced and people don't have the money or they don't have access to lawyers, people get away with it.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, and I sense with my spidey sense that Shang also has a question, but I'm going to make her wait just a minute.
I have 105 right now, but that's okay.
Because
And that was like the fastest discussion of voting ever.
But
Normally, this is like a 3-day lecture.
But I got to take you back to the very beginning of what you were saying.
Yes.
The requirement to own 100 acres of land.
Yes.
At the very beginning. Why in the world would that have been a requirement?
Because Jefferson Davis and the other deists who wrote the Constitution.
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson.
You got
Sorry.
a lot of historical figures in your head kind of working all the time.
I haven't had enough caffeine today. Thomas Jefferson and the others who wrote it felt that a land franchise would prevent demagoguery. That is, would prevent politicians from finding weak-minded individuals and telling them whatever they wanted to hear and getting to vote and destroying the country. They saw us as the new Rome, and they wanted to prevent the rise of a Caesar. Now, what they forgot about that was that Caesar wasn't the one who caused trouble. It was Brutus and the others who took out Caesar, who was legally elected. Once you go past that legal election cycle, you create all sorts of havoc.
Yeah, so.
And the manhood franchise is, John Adams, bless his heart, tried to argue for women to vote. He tried to, but they just didn't have enough votes. And the only reason, here's your funny aside, the only reason why women are included in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and discrimination against sex is banned is because Strom Thurmond was trying to kill the act. And he thought that by inserting gender into it, people would be so amused and they would laugh it out of Congress. He did not expect it to pass. And he regretted it to his dying day.
I'm sure he did.
So that's one of your more hilarious, backfires.
Yeah.
Women finally do get the right to vote. It passes Congress 1919. It passes the states in 1920, mainly because of women's war work. Women were integral to our war efforts in World War I and World War II. And the tradition in European history and culture is if you fight for a country, you get citizenship. Women's war work, women's work as nurses on the front lines meant that it was really hard to argue against it.
Yeah.
But black soldiers have been in every one of our wars. And, the 15th Amendment was really meant for them. But for all intents and purposes, black people, male and female in the South, were not enfranchised till 1965, despite a long and storied history of military service.
So I want to, in a moment, ask David about where we are currently with that historical background. But before I do that, I know Shang's got some burning questions.
I had a couple, but you talked about some marginalized groups, and I was wondering more about the history of refugees and them, coming here and becoming legal citizens, and what that looked like for voter suppression or voting in general.
Well, if you look at the Irish potato famine, they were refugees. And when they first came here, they met in the North especially the Irish Catholics, extreme prejudice, and even were lynched in the South. In New Orleans, Irish Bayou, where all the Irish workers were put, is so far out in the Wrigley's that it's like maybe literal, and I'm saying literally, it's 1 foot from the water. It's the first place that floods. So when you go over I-10. So Irish workers were refugees and seen as less than. And they were seen as the lowest of the low. And ironically, blacks and Irish were the majority of interracial marriages until 1960, because they were right next to each other.
And can I ask, the refugee experience during that time, was that like they were considered like indentured servants?
They were indentured servants. Okay. They would sign a labor contract, but they still had rights. They could vote, they could own property, they could not be killed capriciously, they could not be killed at the whim of the owner, they could not be beaten without having a court order. So there's protections as an indentured servant that you have. You still have the rights of Englishmen that chattel slaves did not have. And the reason why the planters preferred chattel slavery is, one, indentured servant ends, and then you get these surplus guys. And I have this whole lecture about these surplus people that start about 1660 when the mortality rate goes down. And they're in the forts, and they can't get, the only way to get land is to go Davy Crockett out into the Louisiana Territory or the Missouri Territory. And they didn't really want to do that because that means going out in the dirt. This is essentially wilderness camping with your dog and no internet and no hot running water, you know, and no women, because these are mainly guys at this time period. Or you hang around the fort. You get drunk every once in a while, you stay armed, and you might pick up some surplus male work, like chasing Native Americans. Well, this backfires with Bacon's Rebellion. They don't get paid because they scalped the wrong Native Americans. They turn on the planters. And the planters start thinking, now, these surplus guys are a threat. There's a quote in one of the articles I have where the governor of Virginia says, "I'm as afraid of the pirates in front of me as the riffraff behind me." Because he had gotten up this mob to go fight the pirates who were coming in to try to raid the colony. Yeah, the pirates were like the Vikings of that day. They'd come in, raid, scream, steal, burn everything, and steal anything that wasn't put down. They were not Johnny Depp. Pirates were not a Disney movie. Pirates were awful.
Thanks for that clarification.
I got to tell you that. And they didn't look like Keith Richards.
But I'm going to have to ask you, you got to bring this back to the voting, though, because, like, I
They
mean,
didn't
right now I
want
feel like we're
them
doing
to
a
vote.
commercial for your classes right now, and everybody can take your classes.
They didn't want them to vote. So you see a number of suppression attempts in the North, and you see the Know Nothing Party. And those suppression attempts actually give you some of the templates for what happens in the South. And you'll see this again against Eastern Europeans who come here as refugees in the 1880 to 1920 time period. The difference is the suppression attempts couldn't be fully done because Eastern European and these other, the Irish, et cetera, they had guns. And the black codes specifically stripped guns from blacks. And the guns and the German gun clubs here, say in Wisconsin, and the ones, the Czechoslovakian ones you'll see over in Illinois, meant that the legislatures were afraid to pass certain types of legislation. Whereas in the South, they didn't have that fear. So for refugees, this was hard as well. It was really, really hard.
Yeah, that speaks to, so as you're talking about that last little bit there with the gun clubs and all that, I'm just like thinking about power dynamics, and it just makes me sick. And if you got a gun, then we'll let you vote. I mean, come on. Anyway.
Well, they tried to suppress Germans voting here.
Yeah.
In Eau Claire, I mean, they arrested Germans during World War I. They banned Salisbury steaks and called them Liberty Liberty steaks. They called sauerkraut Liberty salad or sausage or something
Reminds
like
me
that.
of the French fries thing back when.
It was exactly like it. And it was, my students were reading that and they were just like, oh my God, you're not making this stuff up. And I keep telling them, no, I don't have to make this stuff up. So we've always had a country, that's ironic, we're a country of immigrants, but we've always been afraid of immigrants. And behind, in 1840, it's the Irish we're going after. In 1880, it's Czechoslovakian and British and Russian. In 1920, it's Germans. And also it's Chinese. The Chinese Exclusion Act is in there. And then 1960s, it's Mexicans and people in the Western Hemisphere. It's Filipinos and Asians. And in the 1980s, when I was a teenager and a young adult, it was people from the Middle East.
Right.
And you've always seen these prejudices and these fears, and it's the children of immigrants. Their grandparents or great-grandparents were the immigrants everybody feared. And now they get 3 generations, and all of a sudden, they're saying the same things about the new immigrants that people said about their grandparents.
So, in summary, voter suppression and disenfranchisement has been around from the beginning.
Absolutely.
And the predominant groups in power use it as a tool to keep themselves in power and to silence certain voices.
And what's really interesting about it is you've had a changing definition of white and what is white. Because the definition of what was white in 1820 did not include the Irish and did not include Scots.
Didn't include Italians either, right?
It did. Oh, it's not going to include Italians till the 1960s.
Right.
And some people in New Jersey will say it still doesn't. Because Johnny Cash was married to an Italian woman and they thought she was black. They thought she was a light-skinned black woman. And there were people who discriminated against him because of that. Rolling Stone actually had an article about that. But yeah, Irish become white or invited into whiteness when there's the threat of a new immigration group.
That's when you know you've arrived, right? As a people, when you get invited into whiteness.
Well,
that's like the pinnacle, right? Is when you get invited into whiteness.
Yeah, but you got to be careful because that invitation into whiteness falls apart real quick, as some Chinese people on the West Coast found out.
Yeah, the whole idea is just really gross. So we need to just real quick, I want to reintroduce our panelists to the audience here, and then we will check in with Adam here about something. First of all, we have David Carlson here, and I promise we need to drill you here in a little bit. David he works with the ACLU. He is the regional director for the Rights for All campaign with the ACLU. And
Regional organizer.
I'm sorry. But I want to call you director because that's
all good.
All right.
I haven't been promoted there yet.
Okay, gotcha.
We're working on it.
He also has really big biceps, and I'm often intimidated by his biceps. And we also have Salika Ducksworth-Lawton from the university here. She's a historian and president of Uniting Bridges, and she's got her hands on all other kinds of things. And we, of course, have Shane Laura Waldinger, the podcast director, owner, founder, visioneer behind the Social Exchange Project, and a great partner in Conversations in Color. And I want to check in with Adam real quick. Do we have any, first of all, I was going to mention there's a great article about voter suppression and disenfranchisement on the ACLU's website. And I know Adam, I've asked Adam to put that link on the chat. So if you're interested in checking that out, it's a great primer on those things here in 2020. Adam, do we have anything from our community just yet?
Yeah, actually, we've got one thing. So if you want to get involved in the conversation tonight, make sure that you are dropping your questions in the Paragon chat. And if you are not on Paragon, if you're joining us on 99.9 FM Converge Radio, you can call in to 715-600-0267 or email your questions to conversations@tomeswab.com. It's more so a sentiment that one of our viewers has shared, and it's kind of interesting because today we actually had a special session called in the legislature, the Wisconsin legislature, that lasted less than 30 seconds to talk about police reform. And according to Wisconsin special session laws, you don't have to actually debate or vote on anything, but they literally were there for less than 30 seconds. They left it open, so there's the potential to come back to it. But one of our viewers said, I'm a longtime Wisconsin resident. In the past couple of years, I feel disenfranchised. Why? Because our state Senate and Assembly won't even discuss legislation on some issues. And I feel as though our legislators are not doing their job, which nullifies whoever I vote for. So could you speak to that sentiment? Maybe it's a sentiment that people in northern Wisconsin and specifically northwestern Wisconsin really kind of resonate with, especially lately with what's been going on.
Well, that's linked to gerrymander, and that's one of the things ACLU did take the case to the Supreme Court, and it got punted there, because our argument is gerrymander disenfranchises voters. That when the politicians get to choose the voters and voters don't get to choose the politicians, your voice isn't heard. When there's no competition, then ideologues they don't have to serve all the people in their district. They only have to do what they want to do because they know they're going to get elected anyway. And we know from the research in both political science and history that when you have one-party rule, you get corruption. So if you have one party ruling the cities and one party ruling the rural areas, those parties don't have to be responsive to anybody in those areas. Hence, take a look at Wisconsin's roads in the north. Hence, take a look at trash pickup in Milwaukee and Madison. So gerrymander really is a problem. We tried to ban gerrymander, I want to say 10 years ago, and it was narrowly defeated on referendum. And it's probably the only way we're going to get rid of gerrymander is either by referendum or, to be honest, demographics. As the North becomes a little browner and the South becomes much more diverse, people are becoming really fed up, to be honest, with both parties. People
Amen.
are
Can we
tired.
just go ahead and put an amen on that one?
Let's put an amen on that. And people are disgusted with the lack of bipartisanship, and people are disgusted with ideology. You know, and the root of idiot and the root of ideology are the same, and that's because ideology makes us idiots. You know, ideologues don't pay attention to reality, and they can't compromise.
Yeah.
An ideologue can't compromise the same reason someone who thinks that it's ordained by God can't compromise, because how do you compromise with sin?
Yeah.
Well, an ideologue will go, how can I compromise and be ethical? But this system was based on compromise. And the only way you have compromise is if you have realistic geographic borders. Now, the expert in this area, who you can go and harass, and yes, he will come yell at me, is Brady Faust. Brady Faust has been pushing for compact, geographic, fair maps for years.
Who is Brady Faust?
He doesn't belong to either party. He was the chair of the geography department at UWEC and the president of the National Association of Professional Geographers. He lives here in Eau Claire, and he runs a geography business as a retiree.
Okay.
And we should bring him on. He'll probably rag me to hell and back. But he's been advocating this, and he's neither Democrat nor Republican. He's been advocating this for over 20 years. But there are people who are backing him up on that, who are Republicans who live in the South and feel like their voices never get heard, and who are moderate Democrats or moderate Republicans who live in the North and feel that their voices never get heard. So gerrymander is a form of disenfranchisement. It was originally done to disenfranchise racial minorities in the 1970s. The Supreme Court held in the 1980s racial gerrymander was illegal, but did not hold that political gerrymander was illegal.
Right.
That's the case that was punted last year. But racial gerrymander and political gerrymander have the same impact.
Right. That was what I was going to say. And I want to segue, if I can, to David on this a little bit with talking about gerrymandering and where we are currently. We've talked a lot about history to this point. So you can feel free to start out with talking about gerrymandering a little bit if you like, but when we think about voter suppression and disenfranchisement right now, what are the expressions of that you see the most in your work with the ACLU?
So I'll refer back to Adam's question quick. One really current thing that has occurred, so there's something called, your political voice, right? And so this is how do you get the ear of the people who are making the legislation, who are, being elected into these positions. And prior to 2010, before Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, we had a variety of different ways that people lobbied their politicians, campaigned for their politicians, et cetera. 2010, Citizens United decided that, so at the federal Supreme Court decided that political contributions from corporations in terms of putting out ads, independent films, social media campaigns, stuff like that, there was no limitation on that. It was the corporations had the protection, the First Amendment protection of political speech. So now, and I think that people, if they really think back to when we started being bombarded with social media memes about politics, bombarded on the media with either left or right information. So we got Fox News and we got MSNBC, right? So it becomes that, who are the politicians and who are the candidates incentivized to go to and listen to in those terms, right? They're incentivized to go to wealthier people.
Yeah, where the money is.
Capital, exactly. They're no longer incentivized to go to farmers. They're no longer incentivized to go knocking on the doors of people that live in urban areas, right? Because all they need to do is get these super PACs on their side, and now they have unlimited information being sent to any demographic that they want.
Are they the people responsible for all the ads that I'm seeing right now on TV? Like every once in a while I'll see the one that says, I'm Donald J. Trump and I approve this message, but there's the ones that say, brought to you by the America First, or brought to you by Americans for the Fair Treatment of Eels. I don't know.
That's dark money.
And
it's propaganda. And until 1990, until the fall of the Berlin Wall, we were mandated to have civics in high school, not just pass a test. And we were taught about propaganda and how to look for propaganda, how to see propaganda, how to weed out propaganda and not to trust certain types of outlets. And then the Berlin Wall fell and we thought communism was gone. And somehow we lost in that 35-year time period.
As if our side of the Cold War somehow, as the American side of the Cold War, was not involved in propaganda.
Oh, that's Voice of America. I mean, we did it too. And, the irony, a friend of mine, no, it was my godson, I want to say, told me his friends in Europe were surprised that we actually believe the news, that we actually watch it, that we listen to this propaganda. Don't we know what it is? Because they've always been careful, because they've always seen the Soviet Union and the US as pushing a narrative on them.
Right.
We are the ones there's Chinese bots and Russian bots in the comment section. We're the ones taking it as gospel truth. We have become the naive idiots of the world, and I don't know how to get us back from that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you.
No, that's okay. I mean, so so you got the whole super PAC, that whole dynamic.
Yeah. So exactly. We have a lot of different dynamics at play. So we have Citizens United versus FEC, where now these super PACs, their political speech is protected. Their political speech being the money that they put into propaganda, basically. Then I'm going to take you back to 2005. So I was in Iraq fighting in 2005 while Indiana was passing the first photo ID law here in the United States. So I'll go back to one thing, and this is something that I'll reference to the University of Massachusetts Boston Sociology Department. Suppression right now, so suppression has been bipartisan, right? Democrats have done it and Republicans have done it. But right now, in the last 20 years, Republicans have been the ones pushing voter suppression. Democrats have been the ones trying to expand the ability to vote, right? 2005, the photo ID push, voting had happened prior to that. Our democracy stood prior to that, but now we have the requirement to get a photo ID, and a lot of people will say, well, what is the circumstance that you wouldn't have a photo ID? Well, me as a veteran, I know that a lot of the people that I served with and people that I knew that served ended up homeless when they got home. I was without a photo ID for a long time, right? But we've earned our right to vote. We've earned more than earned our citizenship. So these voter ID laws first began getting enacted in 2005. Wisconsin gets its voter ID law, Wisconsin Act 23 in 2011, but isn't implemented until 2015 after making it through all kinds of battles in the courts, right? So this is another prong to the disenfranchisement or to the suppression, right? So now we're taking off an entire group of people who typically will be Democrats because you'll either college students, people who are maybe unstable in life, don't have jobs, don't have housing, stuff like that. So typically are going to be voting for Democrats. So that's just another percentage that we're taking off. Now we add on felony disenfranchisement. 6.1 million people throughout America are disenfranchised due to felonies, felony convictions, and then supervision, parole, probation, et cetera. In Wisconsin, as long as you are incarcerated or incarcerated after being convicted. So prior to being convicted, you can still vote. But incarcerated after being convicted, once you get released, if you're still on supervision or parole, you can't vote, right? So me, for instance, I don't get off supervision until 2030, so I can't vote. In certain states like Texas, you even have, so like what I do right now in terms of holding registration events for individuals, there's certain states where me being a felon, me being on supervision, I wouldn't be able to participate in those type of activities. And then just regardless of, so that's another form of disenfranchisement, disenfranchisement in that aspect. Within Wisconsin, we have 62,000 people disenfranchised because of that, because of felony convictions and being on supervision, parole, et cetera. The last presidential election Wisconsin was won by 23,000 votes.
Right.
You know, so since 2005, there has been a surge of voter suppression legislation, but then after 2008 is when it really ramped up. And what happened in 2008, that was very significant. Exactly, first black president, right? So anytime, Salika stated it perfectly, anytime there has been an expansion of voter access, then there becomes a retraction. That is the response, right? And for the last few decades, it has been Republicans that have tried to retract the ability for people to demonstrate their constitutional right to vote.
Yeah.
Now, the big unexpected hit here were elderly people who can't drive. And elderly people who have been born with midwives. So that would be the population that was born 1935 to 1950, 75 into age 85, 90. Because those people, if they're not driving, they don't need a driver's license. And they have before they didn't need to use that to vote. So these laws have sort of caught them unaware. The other thing is if you had a midwife and that midwife misspelled your name on your birth certificate and your birth certificate doesn't match your driver's license, the voter rolls kick you out. So it costs $600, it's more than that now, to correct the birth certificate. How many people are going to do that? My husband had, by accident, a different name on his birth certificate than his driver's license. He chose to go change his name on the driver's license because that's $35. Because we weren't paying the $600 to the state of California to change his birth certificate.
So let me, if I can, in a few minutes here, we're going to go to some more community questions. But one of the things I think that I want to draw out explicitly in this, that if you're listening closely, I think you'll follow along and you'll see where this makes sense. But a voter ID law, in and of itself, is not explicitly racist or excluding any particular group explicitly. And this is the key for me. So when you're talking about, I look at the history of, and I don't want to get into this, I'm not the expert, but just to kind of touch on it, we've talked about in the past the 13th Amendment and different ways to legally keep certain groups of people marginalized. And what I see is in the voter ID laws, in voter roll purges, and gerrymandering, even if the intentions, and they're not, I don't think, but even if the intentions are really pure in those things, the practical repercussions are all, they affect different groups of people according to their race, their income, where they live, all those kinds of, am I encapsulating that?
Yeah,
correctly?
I don't.
The
Can
terminology.
I take that one? Can I take that one?
Just let me throw one thing in. The legal term for that is disparate impact. And that's a law that has different impacts on different groups, even though on its face it appears neutral. Disparate impact violates the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but it isn't always
Enforced.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Now, David, I'll let you go.
So I don't believe that there is absence of bad intentions.
No, I don't
Right?
either.
I don't believe that. So
I don't either.
there has been no data, there has been no conclusive study that showed an epidemic of voter fraud.
Right.
Right. And we even had a district judge, and I cannot remember their name right now, from one of the federal districts in Wisconsin, say that these voter ID laws, and it was a dissenting opinion, these voter ID laws have more of a chance of suppressing the vote than they do of eradicating fraud, right? Fraud that we don't even know if it exists, right? So the intentions very much are to suppress the vote, and this is the reason. Republicans right now, once again, suppression is a Republican thing. It is.
Right.
This is undisputed.
They've mastered the craft.
Yes, this is undisputed.
Yep.
Although in New Jersey, it's the Democrats who do it.
But still,
I
by
want to
and
be
large, I think-
bipartisan here. Whoever's in power always finds a way to stay in power.
That's true. We want to make sure we say this is a nonpartisan discussion, but truly, especially on a national level, it would appear the Republicans have cornered the market on how to do this.
Well, I'm speaking specifically for Wisconsin.
Okay.
And secondly, this is something, once again, go to the University of Massachusetts, Boston, go to the sociology department, and they have extensive research on this, dating back the last few decades. And once again, they said, this research was looked at it in a bipartisan manner. And Democrats have been very guilty of suppressing the vote. But we're speaking on right now, because right now is what matters, right, in Wisconsin. And right now, Republicans are the ones doing it. And the reason that they're suppressing the vote isn't necessarily because they're pointing to black people or brown people and saying, oh, I don't want them to vote. It's we either have to, because Wisconsin is a swing state, we either have to expand our platform to include more people to win this election, or for Wisconsin to be won, or we have to suppress the vote.
Right. It's a strategic move.
Yeah, they're not willing to expand their platform, so they have to suppress. It's one or the other, or they will lose.
Right.
And so they're using suppression tactics to win. That's it.
I think that's what I'm kind of getting at. Is it's like the explicit reason for it may not be racism, but the downstream effect is still produces racial injustice and inequalities, right?
And that's what Salika was. She pinpointed every portion of our history, that the foundation of this country was built on African American disenfranchisement from the entire infrastructure
Right.
of the United States. So when we talk about, there will be, poor whites, for instance, that'll be like, well, I have the same issues in my life, and that's granted. But when we talk about, things being experienced at a disproportionate rate, it's experienced at a disproportionate rate in the African American community because the infrastructure of this country was founded on the disenfranchisement of African Americans.
Yes.
So,
And I will tell you, plug for an upcoming show. We actually have a show coming up in several months where we're going to focus on how America's prosperity was built on black slave labor.
well, one thing that I wanted to segue off of what Salika also said was when she was talking about black codes, we have a version of black codes in Wisconsin right now. And this is what I have been drilling on in this county, which is the HIDA designation, high intensity drug trafficking area designation, a multi-jurisdictional drug task force. We have 8 counties designated with this program.
Right.
85% of the African American population live within those 8 counties. There are 72 counties in Wisconsin.
Yep.
Plenty of counties that have higher rates of drug distribution, higher rates of addiction. Yet these 8 counties are the ones that are targeted. The first one being Milwaukee County, which holds about 69% of the African American population in Wisconsin.
Right.
So how this relates to voting, the more law enforcement programs, the more operations that we have going on within an area, the more police presence, the more charges there will be.
Yep.
And this is another. This is research that has been done. The data supports that white people and black people use drugs at the same rate. They sell drugs at the same rate. Yet African Americans are much more likely to be arrested for the use of drugs, for the sale of drugs, and imprisoned.
Yep.
And
you could ask why.
That's racial profiling. That's a whole nother, that's another one. I mean, I wanted to jump in and say, there's a set of corrupt cooperation between the parties in this.
Yeah.
Because if you look at Milwaukee back in April, remember they cut down so many of their polling places?
Over 150 polling places cut down to 5.
Mm-hmm. Because Tom Barrett was facing Lena, I lost her name. Lena, she was the black state senator for the mayor of Milwaukee contest. Who do you think benefited from losing all of those voting places and didn't care if it hurt the rest of the state?
Yep.
Tom Barrett.
I think this is an important point because it is about race, and yet it's not about race. It's about race because of the impact these laws will have, and some of them have been explicitly racist. But it's also like the whole thing, and we talked about, you and I especially, Slick, have talked about this over and over again, how the powerful will do whatever they can to keep their power and consolidate their power. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things for those of us who may be listening in and engaging in this tonight. If you don't see these laws as overtly racist, you need to still see them for what they are, which is, even if they're not racist, intentionally racist or classist or whatever, they are still efforts by those in power to maintain their power, not necessarily do what's right. And I think that's an important point to make in this. Before we keep talking, I know we've got some questions and comments, and Adam, I want to hand it up.
Can I ask a question really quick, if that's okay?
Adam's going to get mad at you.
All right, go ahead.
This conversation actually kind of ties perfectly in with one of the questions that we've got here, and it's actually about the closing of polling places. So Rachel was asking, she's noticed trends in recent headlines, places in the South, and especially in Milwaukee, of polling places being closed and lines getting longer and longer, people waiting in line for hours to vote because of few polling locations, or because of malfunctioning equipment, also citing the 2018 election for governor in Georgia between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams as another example of this. So how is the targeted closing of polling places been used as a tactic for suppressing votes? And how does this affect disenfranchised voters, and how can we prevent more polling places from closing in our elections?
Well, in Georgia, the federal court specifically said closing those DMVs and voting places was a violation of the Voting Rights Act. But by the time they said that, it was too late. and this is what's called extra legal. It's extra legal action in that the action itself is illegal, but because there's no enforcement, it is treated as legal. One of the things we need to do is probably make whoever runs voting nonpartisan and professional. It needs to be, I know, don't even start me there.
I love it.
That needs to be.
Professional is the key.
Professional's the key, and the word professional has been part of a lot of our conversations lately. I mean, I know people who have worked here with voting, and that really is a nonpartisan office. But in Georgia, it's a partisan office. It's part of the Secretary of State. And Kemp, who was the candidate, should have been forced to recuse himself from any voting, from any impact on voting by their ethics committee. But one of the things you have to understand about my home part of the South is enforcement is not a big thing. It's quid pro quo. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. So what happened, you saw there, it was frankly illegal. He should not have been closing them. He shouldn't have had any, he shouldn't have had any authority over the counting of ballots. And the whole system was openly corrupt. But because there was nobody who was going to enforce, there was nothing you could do about it.
You realize you just basically indicted the entire Deep South, right?
I'm only saying the reality that everyone sees. I mean, it's not like...
I'm not saying you're wrong.
It's not like I'm describing something that everyone at home doesn't know.
Yeah.
All I'm doing is pointing to the elephant in the room and saying, yo, there's a pink elephant with a tutu over there. And they are going, yeah, and we have the power, and what are you going to do about it? And that is the problem.
We keep getting, you and I, we keep getting back to the human condition thing here. Like, it's what it comes down to is when we're talking about people wanting to keep their power, it's just that human condition, the natural inclination to look out for yourself and to desire power and comfort and all those things. And it's amazing to me how all of these discussions, at least in my head, keep coming back to that.
In my lifetime, only 2 governors of Louisiana have not been indicted for something.
Well, and you just indicted them anyway.
Well, the only reason they didn't get indicted, well, they haven't been caught yet. One of them hasn't been caught yet or something. But it doesn't matter whether they're Republican or Democrat.
They're corrupt.
They have all gone to federal. I mean, come on, the head of the Klan in Louisiana went to federal prison for stealing money from the white supremacists. I mean, how bad is it if you hate people of color and you get the other people of color who give you money and you go down to the riverboat and you gamble it away because you're bad at blackjack.
That is the morally most bankrupt of the morally bankrupt.
You know, that's David Duke. And he's still out there running around and people act like he's legit. You know, when you look at...
Hey, I saw a movie that told me that he didn't even recognize a black Klansman when it happened.
There's a whole one we have to do here on how black people who talk white can really mess up a racist day. And I have stories. Of a couple of hotels where I've walked in and they haven't had room, and I've gone out and called the 1-800 number or called their number.
That is so perfect.
And
Cute
yeah.
Good idea.
How that is. I'm just kidding.
Comfort Inn, and I've never gone to one since anywhere else.
And now you've
Cape
thrown
Jerome.
Comfort Inn right under the bus with them.
Yeah, I am, because they allowed it to happen.
We are equal opportunity
We're
offenders
equal opportunity offenders.
So one thing that touches on a lot of those states in the South with just terrible problems of disenfranchisement and voter suppression is 2013. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In 2013, the Supreme Court upheld the decision to take away Section 4, which was the formula that had designated certain states, certain municipalities as having a historical practice of targeting people of color and disenfranchising them from the vote. So with this formula, any new legislation that was going to be brought forth, this had to be sent up to the Department of Justice prior to them instituting this legislation. So in 2013, this formula was, the Supreme Court decided that this formula was outdated. And so right now, Congress could come out with a new formula, right, to identify, like Wisconsin most likely would be a state that would be targeted under a new formula, but Congress has not addressed this yet. So then Section 5, which is the pre-clearance. So the formula leads to the pre-clearance. The pre-clearance is, okay, you can either, the Department of Justice will say either you can institute this law or this law is unconstitutional, right? Well, that's gone. We don't have that protection anymore. So once again, all of these new pieces of legislation that have just, it's been an influx of them since 2005, but especially since 2008, they're all piling up, and more higher percentages of the population are being suppressed of the vote.
You and I talked about this the other day, I think, and you were talking about how basically as the decision was made, we don't need this anymore, so we're going to get rid of it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so what was you gave me a illustration of, what was it?
So RBG, what do they call it? Notorious RBG?
The notorious RBG.
She gave the analogy. It's like walking with an umbrella in the rain and saying, I'm not wet, so I'm going to put this umbrella away.
Yeah, I don't need it
right?
anymore.
Yeah, I don't need it anymore. Well, that's exactly what they did by gutting the power of Section 5 by getting rid of that formula.
Yeah.
And Congress still hasn't acted on that.
You know, I hate to quote Charles Barkley any day and any moment, because Charles Barkley and Charles, I am not a role model Barkley, is just not the citation you want.
It's terrible.
It's terrible. But Barkley said the only thing we have to do, we have to vote and overcome it. Vote and overcome it.
Yeah.
Register to vote, go around all the obstacles, keep fighting them, and overcome it. Because in 1990, when Duke won the Republican nomination in Louisiana, people came out to register to vote. They were like 70 and 80 years old. And my mom was a voter registrar, and she's like, well, why didn't you register before? And they were afraid. But their thing was there was no way a Klansman was going to run Louisiana. For that, they would come out and they would risk their lives. Yeah. And some people have to get to that point.
Right.
You just have to vote. You just have to get out there and you overcome it and you grit your teeth and you say, FCC regulations, and you vote. And I'm going to shut up so Shane can answer
my homie Shane has been very patient over
but
here.
you know, I've really appreciated the conversation, and as questions are coming up, you guys are answering them. But one of them, and maybe this is one of the questions you have, Ed, for this year's election specifically, you know, and maybe more so just specifically in Wisconsin, how has COVID-19 or the pandemic affected voter suppression, with polling places being closed, lines, you know, lengthened, and then having to take all the sanitary and hygienic precautions to have in-person voting. So I wanted to kind of ask what your thoughts were about that. And the other question was kind of just touch on the debate about mail-in voting too, and what the effects.
Yeah, because those are highly related, obviously.
Mm-hmm. You want the David first, and then I can chime in?
So that's why we saw April 7th. Mm-hmm. That was why we had those long lines. But once again, out of the research that you know, I looked into, it's voluminous, but how do you say that word? I forgot.
Voluminous.
Voluminous, yeah. But anyways,
words, man.
what I could get from it was one of the key traits of voter suppression is long lines, and it was really a stark reality for me, April 7th, when I was going to the polls here and making sure that everything was running okay, and I'm watching my colleagues down in Milwaukee going to the polls and going down the lines, taking video of how many people were in line. We have a 1.2% African-American population in Eau Claire County. We have a 69% African-American population in Milwaukee County, and you saw the difference, right? Nowhere else had that that bad of voter suppression happening April 7th. So for the 2020 election, it's incumbent that we, organizers get people out to make sure people request their absentee ballots, fill their absentee ballots out correctly, and send them in. And if they are unable to get that done prior to November 3rd, that they show up, same-day registration, and vote. It's critical.
If you're in Eau Claire County, you can come down behind the city of Eau Claire's, the city hall, and you can give the absentee ballot to them. I believe you're going to be able to do that in Chippewa as well as in Menominee. So you can go in and you can give it to the clerk.
What
For
about
us, it's been automated. You just come and drive through.
what about down in Milwaukee, though?
And Milwaukee does not have, see, and this is why I'm pointing to the Milwaukee executive is the one who is the problem here. And the Milwaukee executive is a Democrat. So the Milwaukee executive can request help from the National Guard and did not. I mean, we had 10 National Guardsmen up here helping. They had 6 down there. So that is, and what people don't understand is the black community down in Milwaukee is fighting both Democrats and Republicans. Because corrupt Democrats don't want blacks to vote because they'll vote them out of office. Lena Taylor was the other candidate, and that was really specifically aimed at making sure she could not win. And you have the same thing. And I don't feel bad saying this because I'm not saying anything that the newspapers haven't said. People in Milwaukee need to put pressure on that executive or sue them. I mean, if you're going to sue them, I would do it in the next 2 weeks. And I would contact, ACLU, SPLC, go talk to them. But make them put enough. They have the money to do that.
Yep.
Up here, COVID is a problem, but I'd say, if you're already registered, you should be getting an absentee ballot probably in the next 2 weeks. Drive that puppy in. If you are not registered, do it now.
And I'll just say, I voted absentee a couple times now, and it's really super easy. I mean, it may not be the most intuitive thing when you first open it up, but when you get in there, you just read what's there. It's not hard to fill out, and the process, they'll track it for you when you send it. And so it's from what I have seen, a very efficient process once you get the ballot in hand.
Just don't ask for the ballot 3 weeks before the election, because then they're getting hammered.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you're trying to get that toy for Christmas for your kid that's, your kid really wants. It was Cabbage Patch Kids in my day, and then it was Xbox when it was my son's day. You're not gonna get it the day before Christmas. You're not gonna get it 2 weeks before Christmas. You need to order that puppy for, well, all right, some of us may go jump the lines and go fight with people. I'm not getting into a fist fight.
I used to work with Toys R Us's online store for like 3 or 4 peak seasons. I have scars about that whole dynamic. I think, Adam, we've got another community question, don't we?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of conversation just now about Wisconsin specifically, but this question is kind of more national scope. So I'm 27, and twice in my lifetime, the winner of the popular vote has not won the presidency. So does the U.S. Electoral College play into disenfranchisement, and if so, how? This is from a young voter, Maddie, who has just recently started voting, and she's just trying to understand the system and how it works.
It was meant to do that. This is what the Electoral College was meant to do. The Electoral College was meant to be a break on the popular vote. Until 1917, the Electoral College was not elected, and senators were not elected either. And it was meant to allow high-born, educated males to use their superior intellects as a brake on those low, unwashed masses. But the popular vote was never meant in this country to elect the president. And there's been more time, 1868 is a good example of an election where it was thrown to the House of Representatives. Because the Electoral College is meant to it's really tilted against the cities, and that's how it was designed to be, tilted against the cities, and make sure that small states had as much power as the large states. So it's meant to be a break on
Population-wise.
Population-wise.
Yeah.
It's meant to be a break on that. So the system is working the way it was designed to. Now, it was designed when the two people running for president, whoever lost would become the vice president. That stopped with John Quincy Adams. So you have to understand that normally Donald Trump's vice president would be Hillary Clinton if we were following what the founders wanted. And Barack Obama's vice president would have been John McCain if we had followed what the founders wanted.
See, I can see that working a lot better than the first one you mentioned.
Well,
we won't get into that right now.
We're not doing counterfactual history here. But what I'm saying is this system was designed to do that. And what you have to do as a candidate, and I won't pick on a certain candidate who has gotten in trouble this way twice in 2008 and 2016, you have to count the electoral votes. And there's 3 states that really, which way they go is where the election goes. Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin. If they get those 3 states, generally they will win the election. Now, go talk to Jeff Peterson or Joel Cypress or one of the others. They might say it's only 2. They might say it's only Ohio and Michigan. But for the most part, you watch Ohio, you watch Michigan, you watch Wisconsin, you watch Iowa. And that's going to tell you how the rest of the country is going to go.
And the last 2 elections, 2000 and 2016, were 2 of the recent ones that the popular vote, the Electoral College did not represent the popular vote. So that was Bush and Trump.
You know, the electoral vote is, there are people who want to abolish the Electoral College. And I'm not going to comment on whether or not to do that. But what I am going to say is that it was designed to do this. What it has done is what it is supposed to do.
Well, and to me, doesn't it fit really well within the narrative of you can only vote if you own 100 acres?
Yes.
It's all part of the same story. So
Yes.
it's really appealing to like rich people with estates.
Well, we've talked about, Ed and I have a conversation going about the idea of contempt. And there have always been groups of Americans who've been contemptuous of other groups of Americans and felt really comfortable trying to violate their rights because they think those Americans shouldn't be able to have citizenship rights. And really, if we think of disenfranchisement as removing citizenship rights and voter suppression as lack of enforcement, in spite of the citizenship rights. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Suppression is against the citizen to keep them from voting.
Yep.
Disenfranchisement is taking the citizenship away.
Like the government should be facilitating the right to vote, but with these laws, it's not facilitating that right.
There's always been a set of people who believe that natural law should be more important than man's law. And in their mind, natural law could mean that white Anglo-Saxon Protestants should be able to violate German rights because Germans are subhuman and they are not white. Who would believe that whites who are white ethnics should be able to suppress the rights of people who are of color because they think it's ordered that way by God or they think it's ordered that way by nature. It makes them comfortable to take these people's rights away. And I'm going to quote Kendi here. The justification generally follows the action. It doesn't start it. You know, they want to suppress the rights. Everything after is lagniappe. Everything after is just justification.
Yeah.
It's about power.
Yep. Just, and I think, again, it's a human nature thing, right? I mean, I see it in the church world, right?
That's another conversation.
That's another, but I was just listening to a podcast today. It was talking about how people will, you know, they'll take action, or they'll hold to a certain belief, and then they'll use what's in the Bible to justify that rather than letting the Bible or their source of wisdom inform how they're going to act and believe. And it's the same kind of dynamic. You know, we do, at the end of the day, most of the time we're going to do what we want to do, and then we're going to find some way to justify it. That's just
It's kind of like the toddler who steals the cookie. And you know this. The toddler takes the cookie, and you ask them, why'd they take the cookie? And they will say, the invisible man took the cookie. In my house, it was the dog who had been dead for 2 years took the cookie. But they wanted the cookie.
right.
And they were going to make up any reason to get that cookie that they could get away with. David, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think that
On both toddlers and cookies.
for toddlers, it's just learning. You know, we have to learn. But for the current state of our politics, and politics, you know, that expands into the home. You know, politics is everything. Our state of politics is weak. We have weak people, and we have people that would rather undermine others, more vulnerable populations, than to improve themselves. Just like what I said about, you know, any, you know, party expanding their platform instead of trying to suppress the other's platform, right? It's weakness. So it's at the individual level and it is at the collective level. And that's what we're fighting against right now. You know, secondly, it does us all harm to have these individuals in the positions that they are, right? So it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on, right? If you're being put in these positions, okay, so the homeless aren't being represented, right? Nobody's going and gathering them, getting them their IDs. I mean, some people are, but in masses, because we need to know, how do we solve this problem? Who is the best person to go to about helping to solve that problem? People in that situation, drug addiction, you know, a lot of the issues that end up leading to violence, all of these issues are things that we need to be going to the source and enfranchising these people, bringing them in and giving them a say. And then we're going to get the right people in office that know what to do. Right now, we're getting people that they will pander to certain groups, and then when they get to office, they throw all of that information away and all of that experience away and just do what, you know, the rich, right now what it is, the rich tell them to do. And that's because they're weak and they're inexperienced. And without that experience, we're not going to have change. So it's time to fundamentally change the way that we have what our politics is defined as.
You preaching, and I'm amening over here. I guess I just did it out loud, but I was doing it internally as you were talking. But I think you're 100% right. And what I'd like to do is, because it's almost 9 o'clock. This is every time it's like this, right? We get close to 9 o'clock, and it's like, how can it be close to 9 o'clock? But I want to talk about action steps. And, you know, the stuff you're talking about, you call it weakness, I call it garbage. That's, in my mind, that's how I interpret it, as garbage. You know, like this whole dynamic we're talking about. So what can we do practically to respond to voter suppression and disenfranchisement? And I know, like, getting involved with the ACLU is an important piece of the puzzle, I think. Certainly, maybe figuring out ways to assist with the polls, maybe, things like that.
We need young people to help with the polls, because the older people who usually do it are more vulnerable to COVID. People my age, unfortunately, I am immunocompromised. And then when I have to start thinking about, okay, I'll just PP up and I'll go do it anyway, and my family's going, No. Have you lost your mind? We need younger people. We need people in their 20s and 30s and early 40s volunteering to help with the polls. That's one of the biggest bottom lines that we have to do.
We need phone banking. We got plenty of opportunities for phone banking.
Like
We
to
have-
call people to get them registered,
Yeah,
that kind
to
of
get
thing?
them, well, just, inform them on, how to get registered, places to go if they're experiencing any kind of barricades to them being able to request their absentee ballot, fill out their absentee ballot, turn their absentee ballot in, anything. This is reaching out to get them this information and just really lighting a fire under others.
Yeah.
People oftentimes think that, no, this group is going to take care of that, right? So I don't have to do anything. No, we got to reach everybody.
Yeah.
Chippewa Valley Votes.
Yeah.
One of the best organizations we have here. If you are watching us or listening to us from Barron County Votes, these organizations will help you register to vote, and they're everywhere. If your organization is having an event in person, call up one of these groups and have them there.
Yeah, Rights for All Eau Claire will also help, and there's a lot of students from UWEC that volunteer or collaborate with Rights for All, and we will help you with whatever you need, coming up until the November 3rd election, and any information you need, anything, any barricades you're experiencing, that's what we're here for.
And Next Gen, if you are on campus and you need help registering to vote, Student Next Gen and Student ACLU will help you to do that, and we're going to try to, because they are students and right now outsiders are not allowed on campus because of COVID, they will be trying to run voter registration drives. I'm the advisor for both Student ACLU and for Next Gen. So,
And for like 17,000 other
and I let go.
committees and-
Somebody else is doing the Black Student Alliance for once in the last 30 years. But I think it's important. We've got to get out to vote.
David, before we close up here, if somebody had questions for you, is there a way they can get a hold of you or how they can get information about you? And
So is there a way that I can release my email with this
Absolutely.
broadcast? Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's dcarlson, DCARLSON, at aclu-wi.org. And contact me. I mean, we're involved in a variety of things at the local level and then also with voting initiatives. So if you contact me, send me an email. There's stuff that can be happening right now as we speak. We have a Judiciary and Law Enforcement Committee meeting coming up on the 2nd, right? So I think it's Tuesday. What I'm going to be presenting at that committee meeting is the access for people that are in the jail right now to vote. So what a lot of people don't know is some people in jail that haven't been convicted yet, they're eligible to vote. So we want to know, we have a checklist. The ACLU of Wisconsin has a checklist for the Sheriff's Department to ensure that each one of these items is taken care of. Things such as having a person designated to deal with any kind of barriers that an individual in jail that is eligible to vote may be experiencing. And this is also, they're not just going to hand them their ballots. We want them to have the opportunity to be informed on what they're voting on. And they need to have access. So this is a checklist that we'll be presenting on the 2nd. And if you contact me via email, one thing that you could do is write public comments to the Judiciary and Law Enforcement Committee, because we've had a lot of citizens doing that, or residents of Eau Claire doing that, and that has shown our local government that people are watching and we have a lot of support. And so, all of these things count. So just email me and I will get you on board.
I've got vote writer cards.
you got to do
and
it quick because it's 8:59.
I got vote writer cards, and I will talk to Karen Voss about getting more of them. These are little cards, and they say all the forms of ID and all the rules for voting. So you can email me at the university. I will get you in touch with Chippewa Valley Vote so you can get the cards.
Well, I'm going to take editorial privilege and take us a couple minutes over here. As we close up here, I mentioned earlier, there's a quote from Abraham Lincoln from the Gettysburg Address where he talks about our government being of the people, by the people, and for the people. And we talked about tonight how even at the very beginning, the founders excluded certain people from being able to participate, whether you're talking about people who didn't own land, or you're talking about Africans that were brought over to be slaves, or you're talking about indigenous peoples, or you're talking about women. There were exclusions from the very beginning. We have, in America, have found creative ways throughout our history to stifle voices. But for us to live out our potential, to live out the promise that is America, we got to unstifle the voices. We got to figure it out. And I know that there are people who are listening to this right now. You may watch the video later, and this is lighting your fire a little bit. My TV preacher, I've never been that, but my TV preacher personality is coming out. There's somebody right now who heard David talking about reaching out to homeless populations and helping those folks get educated about their voting opportunities and registering them. There's probably somebody listening to this right now who's thinking, I want to help with that. And if that's the truth, please email David or contact Conversations in Color, and we will connect you with David or whoever else we need to connect you with. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the Pablo Center, Uniting Bridges, and Converge for being such great partners. I want to mention, speaking of Uniting Bridges, I'm wearing this really sweet t-shirt that you can get down at Tangled Up in Hue, or you can order from their website. And the proceeds from the sales of this shirt benefit Uniting Bridges. And so not only can you look as stylish as I look tonight, which is pretty dang stylish, but you can also support a great cause. We're going to take next week off since it's Labor Day. We might have some special programming on Converge Radio. Not sure yet about that. But in 2 weeks, we're going to come back and talk about a hot topic these days. We're going to talk about protesting and rioting and things like that, and how we should respond to that as citizens. Thank you once again for tuning in to Conversations in Color, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.